What's up, guys? So if you're watching this video, that means you made it to the end of 2020. I just can't overstate how great that is. For all of us who struggled this year, I know that 2021 doesn't really change a whole lot in the grand scheme of things, but I'm looking forward to just a soft reset. I know it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna be more of the same for at least the first half of the year, maybe a little longer. I'm just happy to be able to say that I'm no longer in 2020. It was a really bad year, both in the scope of the whole world and just my personal life. It was a bit shit. However, there was a couple things that weren't so shit, and one of those was new music. This was the hardest top 10 albums list I've ever made. There were about 40 albums that I thought were really good, 20 of those that I thought deserved a spot in the top 10, and obviously you can't put all of them on, so just know that there are so many albums that I loved that I won't be able to talk about today, which is unfortunate because there are some that didn't even get an honorable mention that probably could have been in a top 10 like any other year. Just a quick note on the criteria that I use. First thing, no EPs, so you won't hear Bring Me the Horizon's name on this list, although you very well could have. I thought about considering it an album because it is 9 tracks, but they class it as an EP, so I left it off, but it probably would have been around the 5 or 6 spot. And also, I'm not a music critic, so my top 10 album picks aren't as much to do with I guess the musical intricacies of the record, although I do kind of factor it in. It's just the ones that I personally found myself listening to the most and enjoying the most and related to the most. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So up first with number 10, we have The Path from Fit for a King. Now, despite making a spot on the top 10, this album was slightly disappointing to me because for those of you who have been around for a while, you may remember that my favorite album of 2018 was Fit for a King's Dark Skies. And in fact, it was one of my favorite albums that come out in a very, very long time. I loved everything about it. So Fit for a King obviously had a very tough task to follow that album up, and this one just fell a little flat in comparison, but there are still some great songs on this album. Louder Voice is my favorite. Some of my favorite lyrics of the whole year are in that song. They aren't really doing a whole lot new, but they're doing the formula very, very well. So while this album doesn't quite hit the highs of some of their other records, it's still a very solid listen. So at number 9, we have Yuga. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, from In Heart's Wake. Now, this is one that I actually thought was going to end up being a lot higher when I heard the singles. Worldwide Suicide, fantastic, but then I think it was the third single was Hellbringer. And that song is one of my favorites of the year. It is a total banger. It's a very different sound for In Heart's Wake, but I'm definitely a fan of it, and I think it's great that bands are kind of trying new sounds. It doesn't always work for me. Sometimes it doesn't work, but sometimes it does work, and in this case, it definitely worked. However, I could only put it at 9 because there's a portion in the middle of the album, you probably know what I'm talking about if you're a fan of the band, where there's I think maybe 3 songs that just were not good. If it all sounded like some of those early singles, it probably would have been up a few spots on the list. But the strengths of this album were enough to get it a spot. So at number 8, we have one of my most listened to bands of the year, and that is Stand Atlantic with Pink Elephant. This was a band I was always sort of a casual fan of. I saw them on Sad Summerfest. This year I just got really into them. Pink Elephant, very, very good album. When I first heard it, I thought it would actually be higher as well, just because I was really into it. But as time passed, I kind of put it on the back burner for other things, but there was still a good, I would say, 4 to 5 songs that are pretty heavy in my rotation. And again, the reason I couldn't move it up further is because the album did have a couple weak spots. They weren't terrible songs, just a few that didn't really resonate with me, so couldn't really put it higher than 8. But again, similarly to In Heart's Wake, the strengths were enough to get it a spot. So at number 7, we have Knuckle Puck with 2020. And again, this is actually a very, very similar situation. I could pretty much say exactly what I just said about Stand Atlantic about Knuckle Puck. A band that I was a casual fan of, liked a few songs here and there, but then this album, it was kind of a change for them. It was a little bit mellower than some of their other stuff, and I kind of like that in my pop punk, kind of like it a little more groovy and very, very lyric driven. This was an album that wasn't really on my radar until I heard the single with Derek from Mayday Parade, Breathe, and I thought, wow, that was actually really good. And then the first 4 songs on this album are all just straight bangers. And I was like, this could hit album of the year if it keeps going like this. It didn't really. It didn't quite hit those highs, but for the most part, just a really, really solid album. I don't think there's any track on it that's bad. There are definitely some that are really, really good and some that are good. But again, it wasn't like something so phenomenal that it could make like the top 5. So up next with number 6, we have Code Orange with Underneath. Now, this is that album where you think maybe you've heard it all in metalcore finally. You think you've heard all the sounds that could be made, and then Code Orange comes in and they go, no, here's one more thing that you haven't heard. This album is basically complete chaos. So many different sounds, so many different ways to make a metalcore song on this album, and I really admired that. Code Orange is a band that's really at the top of their game right now. They are exploding, and they were slated to open for Slipknot this summer, which would have been massive for them. They're slated to appear on several big festivals, including Rockville. So I think this is a band that if they're not on your radar for whatever reason, they certainly should be. After this year really for them has been huge, even without the opportunity to tour this album yet. I think they're a band that you're going to see get really, really, really big. So now we are reaching the top 5. These 5 albums to me are very close to perfect. I mean, even with 5 and 4, that was actually my hardest one. I'm like, okay, which one's going to be 5 and which one's going to be 4? But with number 5, I went with How to Survive a Funeral by Make Them Suffer. This is another band that I really believe is on the come up. They're getting better and better every album, and they kind of have a unique sound. Just the way they do their breakdowns and the way they have Buka doing her clean vocals, and it's all just very technical and very, very distinguishable. Their last album was very, very good, and I kind of missed it when it had dropped at that time. But this one I was sure to check out on the day it released, and I was blown away. The reason I put it at number 5 was because there was, like, again, just maybe 1 or 2 songs that I felt kind of fell a little bit short, and the margins were just really, really thin with this top 5. So that's why they ended up in the 5 spot. So at number 4, we have Boys of Fall with Distance. Now, this is a band that has been on my radar since their first album because they kind of sound like A Day to Remember. They kind of use that A Day to Remember formula, which for me is like pretty much my favorite formula that you could use. And I think when they released their second album, I just don't think it quite hit the way they wanted it to, but this one did. I think this is the best work of their career, and I hope this album ends up being kind of a catalyst for them to start gaining more popularity. Lyrically, it was exactly what I was looking for. It kind of almost made me think of it being like the Dark Skies of 2020, although the sound was completely different. The lyrics kind of gave me that same feel, and for me, that's what pushed it to number 4 ahead of Make Them Suffer, was the lyrics for the most part. So now we move on to the top 3. And number 3 is Into the Raging Sea by Broadside. Again, similar to Boys of Fall, with the lyrical content being just really impactful for me personally. But the sound of this album is just so good. Like, this is a band that, again, I was a little about them. They had a couple songs that I enjoyed here and there. That definitely changed this year, and this album, in a lot of other years, probably would have easily been my favorite album of the year, but there were 2 more that I thought were a little better. So at number 2, my favorite heavy album of the year is Polaris with The Death of Me. And similarly to what I said with Fit for a King, Polaris, they're not really bringing a ton of new inventive sounds to the table like, say, a Code Orange is doing, but what they are doing is taking the metalcore formula and doing it absolutely perfectly. This album, I think, is going to take them to crazy, crazy heights. I cannot wait to see them tour this album. Just the breakdowns, just the riffs in general, really. The harsh vocals. Jamie's vocals on this record are just outstanding. And I did say they kind of keep the same formula, but I do believe that Jamie's screams are pretty distinct. Like if a Polaris song were to come on that I'm not as familiar with, or if I heard Jamie get a guest spot somewhere, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's Jamie from Polaris, because his screams are pretty distinguishable. But the formula overall, they just keep it simple, but at the same time, just do it the best that you can do it pretty much. So before we go to number 1, I have 6 honorable mentions. Normally, I only just go with 5, but this year I just, there's like 1 or 2 that I just could not leave out. I couldn't. And there were still like 2 others that I really wanted to throw in here, but I just, again, I already didn't want it to be more than 5, and I kind of cheated a little bit and made it 6. But anyways, honorable mentions. We have Deftones with Ohms, Seaway with Big Vibe, All Time Low with Wake Up Sunshine, The Ghost Inside with The Ghost Inside, Bearings, Hello It's You, and Nomadic with Euphoria. So finally, at number 1, we have one of my favorite bands on the planet, Neck Deep, with All Distortions Are Intentional. And again, this is a band that for me, I've been a fan since Life's Not Out to Get You. A little more on the casual side. When I first got into them, there was like 3 or 4 songs I loved. But then when the Peace and Panic came out, I was like, oh my gosh, like it just really, really clicked for me with them. And then this album came out and it blew that one out of the water. I think this band is just getting better and better and better. They're at the top of the game when it comes to new school pop punk. This album had a really interesting concept behind it with kind of an outcast type of guy who falls in love with a girl. You can kind of track their story throughout the album, but at the same time, it's not overbearing, so you can easily interpret it your own way, and you can easily like listen to the songs out of order. Love every song on the album. The lyrics are brilliant. The sound is brilliant. Like when I'm looking for new pop punk nowadays, this is pretty much the sound that I'm looking for. You know what I mean? I just think it's absolutely brilliant. I'm really hoping that come November, that show at the Hard Rock is going to be able to go on, because I will be losing my mind at that one. But anyways, that's it. That is my top 10 albums. Let me know what you think. I'm sure I have some controversial picks in there, but, you know, and I'm sure I left off someone's favorite album. Chances are I probably liked it. It's just, man, this year was loaded with good music. Just completely loaded. So there were definitely a lot of other albums I would have loved to talk about, but just couldn't fit it in this time. And I'm looking forward to see what 2021 has to offer in terms of new music. Hopefully we keep on this path, because the scene is very strong right now. And of course, the number one thing is hopefully next year these bands will be able to tour these albums. A lot of albums came out this year that deserve to have a full touring cycle, and a lot of songs came out this year that I want to hear live. So hopefully we can make that happen. So thank you guys for checking out this video. Be sure to subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys in the next one.